History is forged by the people who lived it, and from massive battles to fights for freedom or shows of intense strength, these happen to people we deem badass to come to the challenge. Truly, the lives of someone marked with this particular word are heirs to the history and designation of their actions that they have done that might keep them in the badass eternal throne room that they rule. There were many badasses that lived, but today we're bringing you the 4 most badass people of all time. If you always wanted to be a super badass, consider clicking that subscribe button down below to keep up to date on all of our content. So let's get into it. Besting nature is one of the most badass things anyone can do. Fighting the elements and rivaling them with man-made ingenuity is what humanity has been doing for thousands of years. A certain man in particular fought some of the strongest predators in the wild, tigers to be precise, and his name was Jim Corbett. Jim Corbett was a famous hunter who captured countless tigers and leopards in India during the years of 1907 to 1938. He's said to have tracked and killed 19 man-eating tigers and 14 leopards throughout his hunting career. Corbett also was a colonel in the British Indian Army, and he was often called upon to kill tigers and leopards that had preyed on and killed people. Corbett also wrote several books about his hunting experiences, and in his later life he became a photographer and a conservationist. He became a spokesman for the protection of India's wildlife and even assisted in the development of a national reserve for the endangered Bengal tiger. This man went toe-to-toe with an apex predator of the wild and didn't even flinch. And when people were being devoured by tigers, all this man did was grow his nerves, let this badass rest in peace. War is a common theme of human civilization. It's depressing and dark and full of agony. There are people in the history books today that we look at for incredible acts of bravery and honor across our history, and few other conflicts are as critical as World War II. This worldwide battle engulfed the world and turned many against each other. Britain was under siege in those days, and one soldier really stood out. Jack Churchill, also known as Mad Jack Churchill, was a British army officer who was famous for fighting in World War II with a Scottish broadsword, a longbow, arrows, and bagpipes. Churchill is famous for his well-known motto, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." In 1943, Churchill led his soldiers out of Sicily with his sword dangling from his belt and his longbow and arrow wrapped around his neck, while he held his bagpipes in his arm. He captured a town and took 42 prisoners, and even returned back to the town to take back his sword, which he had lost during the battle. When World War II ended in 1945, Churchill is said to have been extremely disappointed. We all know pirates are pretty cool, and dare we describe it, badass. Pirates had no cares for the morals of the weaker people from which they had pillaged and burned through. Some pirates were there for treasure, some were there for booze, and others were dangerously unique. Madame Ching was a pirate who ruled the China Sea in the 19th century. Madame Ching started off as a prostitute but later married a pirate. Ching was also one of the few pirates to ever retire from this job. The pirate that Ching married eventually died in a tsunami, and she took over his role. She ravaged the China Seas and won almost all of her battles. She fought against the countless empires including the Portuguese, British, and Qing dynasty. Going against those ruling powers of the time gives a "I just don't care" reckless and badass attitude, doesn't it? She went against entire navies of ships, some of the greatest countries of the world at the time, which makes her even more badass than most. Madame Ching's fleet defeated many armies and empires. She even captured a famous officer named Richard Glasspool along with 7 sailors in 1809. This woman did not mess around. Sometimes being badass means you just don't care about anything, and care about everything. There have been many rulers across the world who took Asia and Europe by storm, but one man has now rooted his DNA in the very basis of much of the Asian population in China and abroad. His name was Genghis Khan, and his iron fist was without a doubt the hardest in history. Rather than execute rival soldiers, Genghis Khan often absorbed them into his army. One man almost killed Khan, and instead of killing him in revenge, Khan recruited him into his army as a field commander that became famous. Making your enemies fight for you is a badass move. Genghis Khan is by no stretch of the imagination a good man or a good ruler, but while badass, he did a few key things that set him apart in the world at the time. One was banning slavery, as he had grown up in slavery, and so did his family, creating a unified writing system and redistributing the wealth he had at the time to his soldiers, as they weren't allowed to loot the bodies. He was scary though, and would speak quotes like, "I am the punishment of God, and if you had not committed great sins, God would have not sent a punishment like me to you." Only someone badass enough to know they're badass to say that can be considered the baddest ass in history. We hope you guys found these badasses in history to be incredibly intriguing, especially our last one. And as always, have a great one.